Okay. Um, Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our virtual town hall titled UAP Awareness and Response for the Good of Public Safety. My name is Yuan Feng. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at the UAP Disclosure Fund. We are a nonprofit organization that advocates for greater transparency regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP. We also develop policy recommendations for federal, state, and local officials so that they may better understand and approach the complex issues which are raised by UAP. To that end, this is the second virtual town hall we have hosted this year to address public safety officials directly in order to foster an important dialogue concerning how local governments, law enforcement agencies, fire departments, and other first responders should develop policies on how to respond to UAP incidents and reports in their municipalities, and the importance of education and training for such incidents. Our first town hall earlier this year was in direct response to the numerous incidents in and around New Jersey late last year that involved so-called drones of unknown origin appearing in skies over neighborhoods and sensitive installations. State and local officials were in the dark when it came to the origins of these mysterious objects in the sky, and they were left on their own to try and respond effectively in order to protect the public. As we learned in real time during that period, our federal government had no solid answers or refused to share solid answers about the potential threat to public safety these mystery drones might have posed. And whether the potential threat was coming from adversarial drones with prosaic origins or something else with seemingly ambiguous origins or anomalous origins, these incidents dramatically underscored the need for better awareness and preparedness by state and local officials in order to effectively protect the public. While our first town hall discussion addressed how first responders can best prepare themselves for incidents involving drones or UAP, this discussion will focus on building awareness for public safety officials about historical UAP data, methods of data collection and analysis, the necessity for procedures, training, and equipment to respond to UAP incidents, and how potential future revelations might affect the public. And so next, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel of experts who will participate in our discussion today. First, we have Larry Hancock. Larry is a historian, author, and former U.S. Air Force electronics specialist with degrees in history, cultural anthropology, and education from the University of New Mexico. He spent over 30 years in the computer and communications industry before turning his attention to Cold War and national security research. Larry has written more than a dozen books exploring covert operations, command authority, and the political assassinations of the 1960s. He currently serves on the board of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, where he leads their intentions study. And next we have Ian Porritt. Ian is an astronomer and data analyst from New Zealand whose independent observatory work helped discover several exoplanets, including an Earth-sized planet in a binary star system. That discovery broadened the search for potentially habitable worlds. Today, Ian applies his analytical skills to the study of UAP, using complex pattern analysis to better understand their behaviors and possible intentions. His background blends hard science with an open-minded, data-driven approach to the unknown. And next on our panel, we have Dr. Keith Taylor. Dr. Taylor is an adjunct assistant professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where he teaches law enforcement and emergency management. He's a retired NYPD Sergeant Special Assignment and former Assistant Commissioner for the New York City Correction Department. Over his career, he served in key leadership roles, from weapons of mass destruction response to FEMA urban search and rescue planning. Dr. Taylor holds degrees from Howard University, City College of New York, the Naval Postgraduate School, and Columbia University. And we also welcome Dr. Lenore Wiand. Dr. Wiand is a clinical psychologist with more than 40 years of experience, specializing in trauma and holistic recovery. She completed an NIH-funded postdoctoral fellowship in complementary and alternative medicine and pioneered the use of transcendent music to help integrate and heal trauma. Her music-based protocol for PTSD was adopted in a military program at Fort Hood and recognized for its effectiveness. Dr. Wiand has shared her research at major institutions like the University of Michigan, Duke, and the Royal College of Physicians in London. And finally, I'd like to welcome Sean Grosnevor, our moderator today. Sean is a forensic consultant and retired Illinois State Police commander with nearly 25 years of service. He's also a court-qualified expert in bloodstain pattern analysis and firearms and has testified in more than 40 trials. Sean has trained over 50 public safety agencies in crime scene investigation, sexual assault response, and forensic photography. A graduate of the University of Illinois at Chicago, he also taught in UIC's Master of Forensic Science program and continues to advise organizations on investigative and intelligence matters. And now I would like to turn the proceedings over to Sean.
Thank you, Yuan. Today, we're going to discuss the importance of collaboration between researchers, public safety professionals, and elected officials in support of public education on UAP, UAP incident management, and community wellness in response to suspected NHI contact. Regardless of what your belief is, there are a lot of reports. And when I say a lot of reports, we're talking about thousands. So part of this discussion is going to involve understanding the history behind these reported incidents, the data that shows the patterns relative to how often and the similarities that these reports contain, the preparedness of our public safety and government officials in making sure that our public is safe, and the overall psychological impact of these reports. The importance of establishing clear facts regarding UAP and NHI and an appropriate response by researchers, public safety professionals, elected officials, and the public is important. And by doing that, it is important that we examine all of the evidence to include the testimonial interviews, the photos and videos that are put out with purported images of real events, as well as any physical evidence that may exist. As the member of the audience, I'm going to ask you to do something. Consider how you would handle a formal disclosure by our government or any government regarding contact with non-human intelligence. I'm going to take it a little bit further. How would you handle it personally if you personally saw something that affected your worldview? That's what we're going to talk about today as part of this discussion, is to understand the public safety implications and the psychology associated with all of these reports regarding non-human intelligence and UAPs, especially in light of the recent disclosures that have been put forth at our congressional hearings. So to start off, I would like to introduce Larry Hancock, author of Unidentified, the National Intelligence Problem of UFOs, and lead investigator for the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. Larry, thanks for joining us today. I would like you to, if you could, please tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been studying UFOs and what have you determined on their legitimacy?
Well, Sean, I've actually been following the subject since 1964. I was a member of two of the early civilian investigative groups, the National Investigations Committee and the Aero Phenomena Research Organization. After I retired, I began working on Cold War history research and spent something like 14 years in research and writing on Cold War era subjects, national security. Then I began to seriously focus on the national security aspect of UFOs, including the possibility of applying strategic intelligence practices to long-term patterns of UFO activity. As far as legitimacy goes, both the Air Force and the CIA determined early on that the anomalous objects were quite real. Simply no doubt about that. You find it in their internal memoranda and reports. They not only profile many of the same UFO anomalous physical and flight characteristics that are reported even today, but in classified memoranda, they highlighted the strategic focus of this early UFO activity.
So obviously your research goes, far into the reaches of history, in the 60s, as you mentioned. Can you provide a summary of the most credible incidents regarding UFOs and non-human intelligence throughout history?
Certainly, and we these are exceptionally credible because they were investigated, and we actually have the Air Force investigative reports. We have a number of highly credible reports coming from close range observations of UFOs by Air Force pilots during the early 1950s, from Navy pilots during the first 2 decades of this century. And many of those reports were supported by radar tracking. So there was independent confirmation of the UAP in the area of the observer. Well-documented close-range observations also come from military personnel at atomic weapons storage sites, strategic air command bases, and ICBM complexes. This comes out of the 1960s and early 1970s at a number of these complexes. In addition, a series of very credible reports are on record from police officers and law enforcement personnel who extended close and fairly long-term encounters with low and ground level UFOs in the mid to late 60s and 1970s.
So you mentioned the witnesses being, government workers, law enforcement, people that have, consequences for providing false information. So we presume that there's some level of responsibility when these reports are being made. Given the credibility of so many of these reports, why do you think the government has taken such an avoidant position on addressing the facts related to reported UAP or NHI encounters?
It appears that that position is most likely a historical artifact. It's likely based in the national security paradigm that was established for dealing with the very first UFO reports during the later years of the 1940s into the early 1950s. This was a period of time in which the Cold War was just evolving after World War II. There were very specific fears of Soviet reconnaissance over the United States, even fears of preemptive atomic strikes by the Soviets. And that was the context by which UFO reports were evaluated, certainly by the Air Force. And that became the context for reporting and dealing with encounters by military pilots who actually often thought they were being engaged by UFOs that were responding to them in aerial encounters. And that meant that physical engagements, anomalous radar tracks, and even unknown electronic transmissions from UFOs, including friend or foe transmissions, were interpreted and reported as Soviet radar jamming or spoofing and treated strictly from a security perspective. It's true that the official government position began and continues to be that there's no evidence of hostile acts associated with UFO reports. But Congress has recently mandated that the Secretary of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman review and update all directives related to countering unmanned aircraft systems in the U.S. airspace. In essence, that directive reestablishes and continues the national security orientation toward unidentified object reporting. Finally, beyond that, there is no official government position on non-human intelligence, much less any directives regarding establishing positive contact with NHI-associated UFO observations. No official national guidance has been issued by the military services in terms of initiating NHI contact protocols, nor have any protocols been established under Joint Chiefs directives, simply practices for reporting, not what to do during the encounter.
So that's interesting. So throughout history, we have, a volume of reports which is met by the government based on what you're saying that, we're not taking a position on this. We're going to explain this away. But over time, what we've seen is a continuation of reports. And most recently, we have at least two government congressional hearings that have been held where we have some very credible people giving official testimony to some very incredible things. So uh, what do you think is different now that the government is releasing more information on UAP?
Well, it is true that the government is releasing some very selected contemporary reports of UFOs. but without the full data related to those reports. We don't get the electronic and electromagnetic emissions data. We don't get photographic video metadata involved in the incident. So even though some information is released, that makes academic and scientific study virtually impossible. And as of this date, it appears that this is only military reporting of UFOs. As far as is known, there's no broad reporting and investigation of public incidents that is in place. To some extent, the current information being released is actually more limited than the data that was available from the Air Force Project Blue Book inquiries of the 50s and 60s of the last century. At least when we got those reports, we got details of the electronics emissions, what frequencies, duration, we got radar scope photographs, we got radiation measurements, and we got detailed investigations, including witness interviews and the reports from the military investigators. We're getting none of that now. So in contrast, the current government releases provide minimal information on the context of the individual reports. So, with the lack of data and the lack of context, to some extent, we're far behind the curve on what is being provided now as compared to what happened earlier historically.
And that's concerning because again, you just ran off a list of all different reporting metrics as to what these anomalous technologies involved. There's again a volume of reports, and we're still maintaining kind of a minimalist approach to releasing information. And in addition to that, reports are continuing to come in. There are quite a few people that are reporting not only contact with UAPs, but contact with non-human intelligence. And again, no matter what the belief system is, I think part of this discussion is talking about preparedness. In the event that this were true, regardless of what the evidence shows or doesn't show, it's prudent for us to have some sort of a response in the event that this were to be true. So, what do you think is the next step to prepare the public for more information on possible contact with NHI?
Well, in one sense, my view is that the public has already been prepared and desensitized to the concept of non-human intelligence by decades of media exposure related to a variety of positive and negative contact scenarios. The next step would have to be an official acknowledgement of, of the existence of non-human intelligence and some directive to the military services and law enforcement defining scenarios for non-human intelligence contact in regard to UAPs, giving some direction for acceptable responses and some standard contact protocols. That would acknowledgement would be the next step and would set the stage for an open public discussion of the possibility and letting it would also let the public know that this is being acknowledged and addressed so it takes some of the mystery and some of the fear out of it. Given that contact protocols for unknown aircraft and ships are well established within the military services, extending that scenarios and providing examples involving possible NHI would be a first step in preparing the military, law enforcement, emergency responders, and even the public for any such encounters and contacts. Of course, the hardest decision in all of that is going to be who orders the issue of that acknowledgement and any directives. Is it Congress? Is it Department of Defense, the Joint Chiefs, Homeland Security? Historically, such directives originated with the Defense Department and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm not sure that would be the best way to progress to escape this national security paradigm.
So, everybody has their own ideas as to what the next step should be, and you've provided quite a bit of insight as to what the recommendations would be. The keepers of the problem, those who know the ins and outs of whether this is, adversarial, foreign technology or something we don't understand or something we do know what it is and there are concerns. In the event that the recommendations that you're making are not taken, what do you think the government why do you think the government would continue to withhold information? What do you think are the reasons that, despite all of these options that are available to take a next step, why would they not do that?
I think there are two or three answers to that, which vary as to exactly what form of information is held and in play. For example, if let's say there's evidence for NHA verification through scientific methods, materials analysis, confirmation of anomalous propulsion technology through a variety of sensor systems. Um, the problem with that is the temptation is that that's a lot of issues being suggested there for national security and our own capabilities, and that by itself might prompt concealment, even of minimal evidence for NHI. Beyond that, uh, if you got to that point and made a public statement stating, well, yes, they are here, they show no signs of wanting to communicate or contact us, and we can't do anything to engage with them, much less oppose them, that might give pause in issuing any kind of a statement either, because that could very well in itself trigger public fear, panic, and certainly would have negative political consequences. Now, saying that we have confirmation of prior NHI attempts to contact us would raise the issue of lack of any response from us or any attempt on our part at messaging or communications, again, bringing up questions of embarrassing policy and political decisions that might not have been made when they should have been or correctly. And finally, probably the most dramatic would be if there is an existence and concealment of verifiable bidirectional NHI communications that we actually they're there, we can communicate with them, we can exchange contextual messages. That would be even more embarrassing, especially if the communications went beyond basic information exchange to any sort of dialogue. That would certainly be politically explosive, as well as disastrous in terms of international relations. It would also be highly damaging to any administration or political party involved in such a decision to be in NHI communications without informing the public. So unfortunately, there are a lot of both security and political reasons why different levels of knowledge might be held under control.
Larry, you have a rich history in the research of this subject. We thank you for your participation in this panel. You've outlined quite a few opportunities that we have to take a next step. It seems like we should do a full-on assessment of this and really make some decisions about informing the public so that questions are answered that would affect everyone involved. I asked you to invite you to stay on for our Q&A session after the panelist discussions. And for the audience, please submit your questions. We will have a question and answer session following the panelist session. Larry, thank you again for your contribution. And at this time, I would like to turn to Ian Porritt. Ian Porritt is a New Zealand-based data analyst, astronomer, and member of the SCU Intention Study Team. Ian, thank you for joining us today. I know it's early in New Zealand. If you could, tell us what are the important questions regarding UAP and NHI that can be answered with good quality data?
What can be answered with the data? Well, the first thing people think about is proving that UAP are real. And the second thing would be trying to understand the technology. And they're often focusing on one individual case at a time. For me, there is enough evidence that UAP are real. So the question is not, are they here? But why are they here? There are many more questions we should be asking ourselves, and not enough effort is going into answering these questions. These questions require a much deeper analysis of the data. And we need to look at patterns of activity, not just individual cases. And we need to apply a structured analytical approach to bring all the different layers of insights together. It's this layering of insights which allows us to build this deeper and wider understanding, which gives us the ability to answer these difficult questions. Okay, so what are some of these questions? Firstly, why are they here? What are their intentions? Is it exploitation? Is it merely a survey? Are they wanting to assist us? Or are they wanting to collaborate? Are they wanting to expand, relocate, or simply nomadic? Is our planet easy to get to, or are we sitting on the very edge of their reach? Is it one coordinated group, or is it multiple different groups? And if there are multiple groups, do they have different or competing priorities? What are UAP focusing on? And can we use that as a predictor for future activity or to help understand their intentions? How do they behave? How do they react to our behavior? How should we react to them? And how do we engage them? A real-world example would be perceived aggressive maneuvers by military pilots. This typically results in UAP retreating, which is reducing our opportunity for positive engagement. So we need to train our personnel on how they should react, which means we need to acknowledge they exist for a start. They need to be trained to be able to identify what it is, and then they need to have a protocol in place to engage. Another important question is understanding their operational approach. Do they have a small continuous presence, or do they come and go as required? And what does this mean in terms of their strengths and their weaknesses? Understanding their operational profile gives us insight into their capabilities. Building up a profile could even help provide insights into the most likely origins, as different origins will have different limitations and different priorities. The important thing to remember is that they are here for a reason. They have been here for decades, and the current operations may be laying the groundwork for phase 2. So we need to understand what phase 2 might be and how things are changing. Understanding what's gone before and understanding what's happening now allows us to anticipate what might happen tomorrow. Understanding the answers to one of these questions also provides insights into understanding the next question, as their intentions, their behaviors, their focus, their limitations, and their origins are all interrelated. So we work through the data, building up a library of patterns and indicators, which help provide answers to these questions. So the patterns in the UAP data can provide a lot of information about who they are, why they are here, and where they're from. But importantly, what might be happening next. If we want to understand the future, we need to understand the past and the present and what direction it's heading in. But it's a very slow and involved process, but it's important that we follow a structured process so we can have greater confidence in our findings.
So you mentioned patterns and indications, and for our audience, my understanding is that means that you're collecting a variety of information relative to date, time, location, time of day, specific behaviors. You have a large menu of activities that you're collecting in order to establish whether or not there's a pattern. And we just heard from Larry, who gave a history showing that this information goes way back into the times when the governments were collecting this information. So we have, basically what I'm saying is there's a lot of data. So in the interest of gathering information that will establish facts, again, we talk about evidence. The data is taken from reports from people, many of them who are credible. But yet and still, there is a difficulty with various groups and individuals, cultures, with being able to internalize this information and render a judgment as to whether or not it's believable. So what are the gaps in the collection of data relative to these encounters? What's missing that is preventing larger society from looking at this as, something that needs to be investigated further?
A significant part of the effort in pattern analysis and interpreting those patterns is getting the data into a workable format so we can start the process. But before you even start, it's vital to understand the question you're trying to answer, as this determines your approach to the problem and what data you need to answer that question. It needs to be in a structured process to remove unwanted noise and bias to be able to reveal the hidden patterns. And you need to understand the limitations in your data you're working with so you can use other techniques to work around these limitations, or if you can't find a different approach, not to over-interpret your conclusions based on weak data. So I'd say the biggest gap would be the need for a global database. We need to treat this as a global issue, and we need to share our data, and we need to share our findings. We need to work together, and this is not just across borders, but across disciplines. I think it needs to be a not-for-profit organization with open access. The data can't be held in restrictive private or government ownership. In terms of the data, accurate time and location, of course, but there is a wealth of other specific data required when we get down to answering these very specific questions. We need details for each case relating to the geographic location, but we also need to understand all the different things related to that location. For example, the types of military facilities, the environmental impacts, natural resources, populations, infrastructure. So we can answer the question as to why that location and why that time. For the reports themselves, information about their behavior, craft dynamics, occupant details, there's a very long list of possible information. But the important thing here is we need a global standardized approach so that the data can be brought together. When we're talking about a global database, language is another one of the issues. Having the database available in multiple languages is important. Then we get down to the quality of the data. All data should be collected and available, but we need to know if it's been investigated or not, what the conclusions were, and how reliable the information is, and then linking it back to the original source. So there's a lot of gaps, but it is solvable by a global coordinated approach.
So the efforts currently, based on what you're saying, is that there's a lack of collaboration, which keeps everything separated, and so we're kind of stuck gathering information on what's happened in the past. And the opportunity for predictability with good data analysis seems to be slowed down or even obstructed. So keeping your recommendations in mind, what can we determine about the current state of UAP incursions and reported NHI contact from the data that we have been able to analyze?
Firstly, the published analysis I've done so far has been focused on the US and during the period between 1945 and 1975. So I'll focus more on that period. But in order to understand what's happening now and how that might change, we need to understand what's happened in the past. And the past has some very useful data. From the study so far, I can say that there was a very clear focus on the atomic warfare development in the US. And this was at key facilities and at key times, and the activity was significantly higher than at standard military sites. There were clusters or windows of activity around different facilities, but we don't see UAPs over different facilities at the same time. Their operational approach is always sequential. They survey one site and then they move on to the next site. Even though there's a strong focus on the atomic warfare complex, their activity is always sequential, suggesting a deliberate tasking of activity, or their operations are limited by resource. In the 1960s and the 1970s, we start to see more UAP reports involving the public, with an interesting cluster of activity between 1969 and 1974 around the Midwest of the US. In 1975, we have a cluster of activity in October and November around the Northern Atomic Deployment sites, including ICBM silos. So we start to see the switching back and forth between military and public focus. There was also a period in the 1950s where UAP responded to military friend or foe coded transmissions and responded back with a correctly coded response. We also noticed a change in behavior. During the 1940s, they were operating more during the day and engaging in what can be described as display type activities. In the 1950s and the 1960s, this began to change, and by the 1970s, it's almost exclusively at night for both the military and the public. While operating at night suggests a clandestine approach, the craft are often seen with lights. These lights could be for our benefit, so we're aware of their presence, or they could just be operational, required for the operation of the craft or operation of the task. Importantly, though, they go dark when military interceptors arrive, either lights off or suddenly relocating and resuming activity when the interceptors leave. In the early period, their overt activity in the 1940s and 1950s could be interpreted as part of an initial contact process, wanting to make us aware of their presence and testing our responses. But if this was their purpose, then by the 1970s, they've changed their approach. Any changing UAP patterns is a key thing to focus on, as it gives us signals as to where to refocus our efforts or how we need to adapt our approach.
So again, you've provided a lot of detail as to what you can extrapolate from the reports and the data that you've been able to obtain. But as you've mentioned, your analysis has been, within a certain period that's pretty far into the past. 1945 to 1975 is what you mentioned. So that's concerning because you're also mentioning potential contact protocols and operational efforts. I think a reasonable person would want to know, what does that mean today? Because, your average person, even if, the government were to say, yes, this is real, but this was back in the 40s, most people won't really, be too concerned, other than they'll be wowed by it. So with taking these reports at face value, considering that there are some, quite a few credible sources, you mentioned an operational approach. Taking all the patterns that you've mentioned together, what do you think that could tell us about possible operations and presence of non-human intelligence on Earth, based on the data that you've been able to analyze?
I would say that they've had a continual presence on Earth over this period rather than coming and going. And at least up until the mid-1970s, it wasn't a large presence. We see a continued baseline of activity, and the data relating to the US military and the public suggests their operations were sequential. This suggests a continual but limited presence. As mentioned, they appear to avoid direct engagement, operating at nighttime and avoiding military interceptors, stopping their operations when interceptors approach and restarting when they leave. This suggests either an operational vulnerability, or on a positive note, they're not wanting to put future engagements in jeopardy due to misunderstandings and negative engagements, so they've lowered their profile. There are peaks in activity late 1940s, in 1952, during 1954 in Europe, and in 1957 in the US. But these peaks appear to be related to their activity being more likely to be observed rather than an increase in resources. So the peaks are activity-driven, not necessarily resource-driven. So during this 30-year period, we're starting to understand some of their focus. We're seeing changes in behaviors, and we're gaining insights into their operations.
So again, our ability to predict hinges on collaboration. And you mentioned that, many different organizations are collecting data, but they're siloed. They're separate, and there's not enough collaboration. Again, what value does research collaboration have with establishing strong predictability for data analysis? This is in the interest of knowing what's happening right now, what's going to happen in the future.
For me, in the pattern analysis I do, it's critical to have this collaborative approach. And it's not just in sharing data and in sharing the results, but integrating expertise from across diverse disciplines. It's going to require a multidiscipline approach if we're going to answer all the questions we need. So we need a diverse set of skills, but we also need a diverse range of information, not just diverse in terms of UAP reports, but what else is happening? Without this background information, UAP activity could look random and unstructured. And from the analysis we have done, it is not random, it is purpose-driven. Having a wider and deeper database of global UAP reports and linked to external information databases so that we can understand what was happening at the time and the location. And importantly, how that relates to other activity elsewhere, so we can understand what's happening. So these these silos, fragmented and unstructured databases results in the analysis being a very slow process. But it's also important, or just as important, to have a diverse team of people to fully understand what's happening. So again, it comes down to a global approach involving multiple disciplines.
So that global approach, that comprehensive approach across multiple organizations and multiple countries, again, structured and unstructured and fragmented databases are going to slow that research down. So what problems could this cause for comprehensive analysis?
Firstly, it means that we won't learn as much as we can about the phenomenon, or it'll take us longer to get the answer. But the concern I have is as we move forward, we may find ourselves in a situation where we need fast and up-to-date information in a dynamic environment. And this fragmented and unstructured approach will not allow this. UAP engagement could literally change overnight. Today, we could be debating if they're real or not. And tomorrow, we're dealing with a very real hostile threat. Or they could be friendly and we come out all guns blazing and lose an important opportunity to engage. There's a lot of negative outcomes due to misunderstandings and getting it wrong. We may have the luxury of time now, although I think this luxury of time may be an illusion. But in the future, things may develop very quickly and we won't have time to gear up. And we can't afford to waste the time we have now. So we need to establish a global cross-functional group dedicated to collecting the data and, more importantly, understanding what is happening and how it's changing. They are here for a reason. They are investing time and resources. So I would expect the situation to develop. Now, we currently have a window of opportunity to learn and get ready. When that window closes, and it could close fast and without warning, then that opportunity is gone.
So the opportunity that we have here, again, coming back to Larry, is that we have some next steps that we need to take. And you've made something, a very important observation, is that if we don't properly assess this, we could be, failing to recognize a possible threat existentially, or we could, jump to a hostile conclusion where we engage hostily in a situation where it's not hostile. And again, the way to resolve that is to gather the data, work collaboratively, and make sure that we are properly assessing the situation. Ian, thank you so much for your time in today's discussion. We will work hard to make sure that we appeal to those that have data to collaborate together. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Keith Taylor, Adjunct Assistant Professor for John Jay College in New York. Dr. Taylor, we just heard from Ian and Larry regarding the history of the reports and the patterns relative to the geographic locations and the behaviors. We talked about the importance of collaborating where there appears to be a lack of collaboration and therefore limited data. And what it seems to be is that there's really two conversations going on here. There's the debate on whether or not this is true because there's insufficient data, insufficient evidence. And then there's the conversation of, well, what do we do about it in the event that this is true? We're entangled in the is this real conversation that it's obstructing our strategic preparedness. In law enforcement, we trust our law enforcement and public safety professionals to keep the public safe by gathering evidence, conducting investigations to ensure we have the best information to make the proper decisions. So in your experience, how important is the role of public safety with respect to reported encounters with UAP or NHI?
Thank you, Sean. Public safety agencies play a crucial role, front-line role when unexplained anomalous phenomenon incidents are reported. Police, fire, and emergency medical responders are often the first to investigate unusual sightings or encounters, which means that they must ensure the safety of both the public and themselves while dealing with an unknown situation. UAP incidents can pose concrete safety hazards, for example, mid-air collision risks or electromagnetic interference with communications equipment that have been documented during UAP encounters. In one 2023 case, police patrol radios failed during a UAP observation, and similar disruptions occurred near military and critical infrastructure sites historically. These risks underscore that public safety officials need to be prepared to manage UAP events as a matter of community safety and officer safety, not just because of curiosity. As official recognition of UAP has grown, starting with the 2021 Director of National Intelligence UAP report and the congressional hearings that have been held in recent years, there is an expectation that public safety will treat UAP reports seriously and competently. Experts emphasize that protecting public safety hinges on collaboration and a proper handling of public concerns in the aftermath of UAP incidents. So if a citizen reports a strange object or even an encounter with an alleged NHI, non-human intelligence, the response by police or 911 dispatchers can greatly influence public confidence. A well-trained, informed response can prevent panic, preserve evidence, and provide credible documentation for further investigation. On the other hand, dismissing or mishandling such reports could lead to loss of trust or missed opportunities to collect important data. Historically, UAP encounters have occasionally resulted in physical or psychological effects on witnesses, including first responders. A DIA study described injuries from close encounters with unexplained anomalous vehicles, largely due to electromagnetic radiation effects. Law enforcement officers have been among those reporting health issues after UAP incidents, yet this was not widely acknowledged. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office within the Department of Defense is studying adverse physiological effects of UAP exposure, and this lends further weight to the idea that public safety personnel must be aware of potential health risks and ensure proper medical support for themselves and civilians if a UAP incident occurs.
So you went through quite a bit of information relative to government reports and public safety response preparedness, or the importance of that. Based on the volume of reports that have come and the active efforts of government to investigate, incidents related to these health effects related to these incidents, what type of policies and awareness training have been developed for public safety professionals to effectively respond to reported UAP encounters?
I'm not aware of any police departments that have independently created policies addressing UAP incidents. However, a notable development is the Major City Chiefs Association UAP Reference Guide, created in June 2024. It was the first guidebook for law enforcement on documenting and responding to UAP sightings or incidents. The MCCA represents the chiefs of the largest U.S. cities and released this 11-page reference guide to normalize UAP reporting and educate executives of law enforcement agencies on what to do if their officers encounter something unusual. One of their members, Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Chief Johnny Jennings, said on a news program, "They're happening. It's important that we are able to report them. The goal is to ensure officers know how to detect, track, and report UAP incidents, and that their chain of command takes such reports seriously. By treating UAP incidents or sightings as legitimate calls for service, this policy guidance aims to remove stigma and encourage proper documentation." Key recommendations from that guide include how to observe and describe anomalies, safety precautions, and the importance of timely reporting through whatever channels are available. In terms of actual training, there has been a training framework that has been suggested to give officers and other responders a spectrum of skills and knowledge to handle UAP incidents. A curriculum hypothetically would cover introduction to UAP, definitions of sightings versus contacts, historical case studies, standard operating procedures for UAP encounters, a step-by-step response protocols with scenario-based exercises, initial response and assessment, which would be best practices for receiving reports, ensuring scene safety, and documenting observations, evidence collection and preservation, which would include methods for collecting unusual evidence and maintaining chain of custody, handling contacts and encounters, which would be guidance for cases of alleged direct contact or possible abduction, including assessing physical and psychological impact on individuals, interagency coordination and information sharing, how to notify and collaborate with federal agencies like DoD, FAA, or scientific organizations, communication skills, managing media inquiries and public communication about a sensitive incident, and continuing education awareness, emphasizing ongoing learning as UAP research evolves, as well as ethical considerations about the same. So this multidisciplinary training model would draw lessons from historical incidents and incorporate them into modern emergency response practice.
All right. So you outlined recommendations for training and preparedness. We heard from Larry on the history that goes back decades. We have patterns and indications, the efforts to collect data, and we have a growing interest from the public, largely due to the ongoing reports. And then, of course, we have congressional hearings where witnesses are testifying under oath as to what they're experiencing. What do you think? What is the current climate of public safety leadership with respect to training, resources, and response to UAP? I mean, where are we at?
I think the attitude of public safety leadership towards UAP has evolved from cautious or dismissive in past decades to increasingly engaged and proactive today. As of 2023, most police and emergency service leaders had given little official attention to UAP, reflected by the fact that virtually no agencies had protocols or training in place. But due to a combination of high-profile UAP events, federal action, and public interest, it's begun to change this climate, especially the 2023 through 2025 congressional hearings and the proposed UAP Disclosure Act legislation put a spotlight on UAP as a legitimate national security and public safety concern. So this high-level validation has prompted many public safety leaders to take the issue most seriously. And again, the Major City Chiefs Association UAP reference guide signaled to its members that UAP is an emerging issues that police chiefs must prepare for.
Okay, so it sounds like there is an emerging interest, from our local and county and state agencies as well as our federal government. What resources and strategies do you think would be helpful in appropriately responding to UAP encounters?
There are several key resources and response strategies to ensure appropriate and effective handling of these incidents. Establish standard protocols and reporting processes. So developing clear standard operating procedures for UAP incidents so that officers, dispatchers, and emergency managers follow a uniform process when a sighting or encounter is reported. So this would include a standardized reporting mechanism to collect data in a consistent format across local, state, and federal levels. As of now, we don't have any official national reporting system for law enforcement, so agencies may need to create interim solutions, say contact with local fusion centers or with Arrow directly. A standardized UAP report might record time, location, description, witness info, and any sensor data in a structured way, enabling easier aggregation and analysis later. The NDAA for fiscal year 2023 mandated that government personnel be given a way to report UAP incidents up the chain. Mirroring that, police and fire departments should route UAP reports into federal channels, such as through the FBI or through Arrow, so that local observations contribute to the national picture. Specialized training for responders would be important. Invest in training programs that teach responders how to identify UAP and to respond safely. Training should cover how to conduct a preliminary investigation of a UAP sighting or encounter, including safe approaches to a scene, the use of detection equipment as available, and proper documentation of the event. Responders should be able to distinguish between ordinary objects, such as drones, Chinese lanterns, planets such as Venus or Jupiter, from potentially anomalous phenomena through knowledge of common characteristics. Training should also emphasize maintaining professionalism and avoid bias or ridicule. Every UAP call should be treated as genuinely as any other citizen report. Incorporating scenario-based exercises or tabletop drills, for example, role-playing a police unit responding to a UAP sighting call, can build confidence. Training should include awareness of electromagnetic or radiation hazards. Officers might be equipped, say, with a triage protocol for when police vehicle electronics fail, or citizens exhibits symptoms after a close encounter. By having a multidisciplinary approach, it will allow first responders to be taught not only about tactical response, but also the basics of scientific intelligence and even psychological aspects of UAP encounters.
All right, so given the elusiveness that many report regarding these technologies and the delayed response that results in a gap in evidence that's collected for these reports, what are the biggest factors? What are the gaps in UAP investigation that have contributed to unsolved incursions? Why do we not know what's going on?
Part of it is due to the lack of standardized protocols of reporting historically. So for decades, UAP sightings incidents were handled ad hoc. There was no unified protocol for first responders or investigators to follow, meaning data collection was inconsistent and often complete. The MCCA report found that no known official UAP reporting mechanism or common procedure for law enforcement means that the gap for when incidents occurs, officers are not going to interview witnesses thoroughly, will not perhaps preserve evidence properly, or not forward the information to agencies that could analyze it. So this absence of reporting framework has allowed many cases to fall through the cracks. Sightings remained only in local logs or were never documented at all. So patterns in recurring incursions would go unnoticed. There's also fragmented data and lack of centralized analysis. Because UAP reports have historically been scattered among various organizations, military databases, civilian groups, academic archives, etc. There's no single repository of systematic sharing of UAP information. So the NASA's 2023 UAP study team pointed out that, quote, the multitude of civilian reporting centers, unquote, has hindered efforts to get a clear understanding of UAP prevalence and characteristics. Even within government, stovepipes have existed between the Air Force, FAA, intelligence agencies, and local authorities. This fragmentation meant investigators would often lack access to the full picture. A local police authority might not know that the object a citizen saw and reported was also tracked by military radar, for example. Similarly, clues that could solve a case might be held by another entity unbeknownst to investigators. So stigma and underreporting is also a very real problem. The historical stigma around reporting UAP meant that pilots, police officers, and citizens hesitated to report sightings for fear of ridicule or career repercussions. This cultural reluctance led to massive underreporting. As former Navy pilot Ryan Graves testified to Congress, 95% of the incidents that he estimated went unreported due to a lack of a safe standard reporting mechanism. The result is that investigators are only aware of a fraction of events. Stigma also meant that officers did not take initial reports seriously, potentially dismissing witness accounts or opportunities that were witness accounts or not logging calls as UAP related. Consequently, valuable evidence, timely response opportunities were lost. Insufficient physical evidence and data quality. Many UAP incidents lack sufficient evidence to draw firm conclusions. Encounters often rely on eyewitness testimony, which, while important, can be subjective and hard to verify. Hard data like clear photos, radar tracks, and material samples are rarely obtained. Investigative bodies like the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies have identified criteria for a credible case, and they have to unfortunately decline investigations when reports don't meet minimum information thresholds. Common scenarios that a single witness sees a strange light with no corroborating recording. Such cases often remain mysteries due to lack of verifiable data. Even when evidence like photos and videos exists, they are sometimes low resolution or the chain of custody is broken, so authenticity is in question. This gap is gradually closing as more people utilize smartphones, and the amount of data of evidence through video evidence is increasing. But the majority of legacy UAP reports have limited forensic evidence, which hampers definitive investigation.
All right, so you gave, volumes of recommendations and, volumes of problems that result from gaps in, investigative procedures. Given the recent congressional hearings on UAP, what is the principal priority that you would recommend that the public safety community be doing to better respond to reported encounters with UAP or NHI? What is the primary focus that we would ask of our public safety agencies to focus on relative to these incidents?
So the public safety community should respond proactively to better handle reported encounters with UAP. Key steps would include implementing training and protocols now. They should not wait for federal mandates. They should begin incorporating UAP scenarios into their training curricula and field protocols immediately. The congressional hearings confirm that UAP sightings and incidents are occurring and are often not properly handled. So police and fire departments can adapt the emerging best practices into their own standard procedures. For example, police departments could issue roll call training bulletins summarizing what steps an officer should take if a citizen reports a UAP, whom to notify, how to document, and how to approach these scenes. Fire departments and EMS should likewise plan for unusual situations. For example, responding to an unknown object crashing or assisting individuals who claim some sort of contact with NHI. The development of a model UAP response policy by respected bodies like IACP or NFPA could be accelerated by referencing congressional hearing findings, and agencies can customize these models to local needs. They need to also consider aligning with legislative and federal initiatives. Congress has been active through the NDAA 2023 and 2024 amendments and proposed bills in creating frameworks for UAP reporting and transparency. The public safety community should plug into these frameworks. For instance, the fiscal year 2023 NDAA requires that military intelligence and civilian government personnel have a means to report UAP incidents to AARO. This implies that local government employers, which would include many first responders, should be encouraged and protected to report UAP up the chain. Public safety leadership should make their officers aware of this channel and encourage its use for any significant incident while still following immediate local reporting as appropriate. By staying aligned with federal efforts, AARO's work in particular, NASA's research and FAA reporting systems, local agencies can ensure that they are part of this larger solution and have access to the latest information. They should also enhance communication with public engagement. The congressional hearings have made UAP a mainstream topic, so the public will increasingly look to local authorities for answers or to report their own sightings or incidents. The public safety community should be ready to engage openly with the public on this issue. During the hearings, transparency was a major theme, with lawmakers and witnesses alike stressing the need to reduce secrecy. Public safety agencies can mirror that by being transparent about their UAP response efforts. If an unusual incident occurs and becomes local news, agencies should consider holding a brief press conference to acknowledge it, even if the explanation isn't yet known, and to discourage speculation. The key is to show that law enforcement and emergency services are approachable and credible on this subject, which will in turn encourage timely reporting and reduce misinformation. So in essence, public safety should help set a fact-based narrative emphasizing safety and investigation and reducing the opportunity for disinformation to occur.
All right. So again, so the priority is that, public safety, we really need public safety to act and not wait on a federal mandate and proceed with, the inquiry and investigation as it would for any other reported incident. And very often when it comes to the allocation of resources, we're in a catch-22. The executive decision makers require evidence in order to allocate resources. And of course, in order to gather the evidence that is needed to justify those resources. So what additional information do you think is needed to justify allocating those resources? What more information does our public safety community need in order to say, hey, okay, I haven't personally seen anything. There's a lot of people that haven't, but there's this group or there's some people that are making these reports. And now there's a lot of talk about it at the federal level. What do they need in order to mobilize resources, to allocate taxpayer dollars to those resources?
There are certain types of information that are particularly useful and needed. Quantitative data on UAP incidents and trends. Decision makers respond to numbers. Having solid statistics about the frequency, location, and nature of UAP reports will help justify resources. For example, if an agency can show in the past year they received 200 credible UAP reports via 911 or officer sightings, that indicates a non-trivial workload that merits training and analysis. National data is also important. The ODNI's UAP report for 2022 cited 510 UAP reports logged by the military and ODNI, of which 171 remain unidentified after analysis. If further annual reports show an upward trajectory in sightings, this trend could be cited evidence that UAP encounters are increasing and we need to be ready here at home. Additionally, information on near misses or safety incidents related to UAP will carry weight. For example, how many pilots or aircraft had to take evasive action to avoid UAP, or how many law enforcement officers report equipment malfunctions or health symptoms during UAP events. Concrete incident logs and case studies with dates, locations, and outcomes compiled at a national level would help local police executives to be able to say, this isn't hypothetical. Here are documented incidents where public safety was at stake. Recent efforts to encourage reporting, such as the FAA and NASA, considering using the Aviation Safety Reporting System for UAP, should yield more of this safety data. As that data comes in, it should be shared in aggregated form with local agencies to inform their risk assessments, which leads into the second type of information that would be important. Risk assessments and threat analysis. Beyond raw counts, the nature of UAP encounters needs to be characterized in terms of potential threat. For resource allocation, it makes a difference whether UAP are seen as a minor curiosity or a significant public safety hazard. Information is needed in questions like, what is the likelihood of a UAP causing harm? The hearing testimony by Ryan Grace already labeled UAP as an aviation safety risk, citing proximity to aircraft and critical sites. If analysis can show X percentage of UAP sightings occur near airports or sensitive infrastructure, or certain UAP have demonstrated capability, speed, maneuvers beyond known drones, representing a possible collision hazard, unquote, those points will bolster arguments for dedicating resources or detecting technology to those locales. Furthermore, any evidence of adverse health effects on humans would be compelling. If first responders might be exposed to radiation or other effects, agencies must invest in protective measures and training. Thus, scientific and medical data on UAP-related injuries or electromagnetic interference ranges directly inform what equipment, for example, radiation monitors, Faraday bags for electronics, etc., and training are needed. At present, much of this is anecdotal or in case study form, or more systematic study, perhaps through Arrow or the CDC, would provide the necessary evidence to unlock funding.
All right. So again, the theme of the next, the next steps is again more information, more disclosure of details that would inform our strategic response. The collection of evidence is one process to establish the facts related to the reported incident, but as you mentioned, the risk and threat assessment is a separate issue. It is a plan for a hypothetical situation that may not have enough evidence to prove that this is actually occurring or going to occur, but nevertheless is important that we have a plan, much like a planet-ending asteroid or an earthquake in the Midwest. Any calamity that could be a threat, we should have a plan for. And we appreciate your recommendations for the public safety community. We ask you to stand by for the Q&A session following the panelist session. Dr. Taylor, thank you for your insights, and I look forward to seeing you in the Q&A. At this time, I would like to turn to Dr. Lenore Wiand. She's a clinical psychologist with over 40 years of experience. And as part of this panel, what we want to do is make sure that we're addressing the psychological implications of the reports, regardless of anyone's individual beliefs, whether there's enough evidence or not. The issue is, how will the public receive this information in the event that this were to have some fact behind it? So, Dr. Wiand, thank you for joining us today. From your perspective as a psychologist, let's kind of go back to the foundation. What are some of the symptoms of anomalous experience, and how can they be distinguished from a mental illness, which is what some people chalk this up to be when someone reports something like this?
Well, I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about trauma, since it can be a significant traumatic event. But first I want to say that most of us as adults have experienced trauma. It's pretty common, and it can be, but it's also significant. The trauma can be the loss of a loved one, the loss of a beloved pet, a divorce, a loss of a job, a medical diagnosis that is shaking. All of that is trauma. But also we are resilient human beings, and this is an innate capacity to heal, to resolve things. So these issues get resolved, remit within a period of time, and then it's okay. It's not like it's gone, the memory's not gone, and some of the feelings are there, but it's no longer a traumatic incident. So trauma is an external event that is tremendously distressing, is overwhelming to the point of being flooded with feelings. And the feelings are so difficult and so much for thoughts and feeling, it becomes difficult to process either of that.
So, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just otherwise, there can be a sense of being dazed, disorientated, confused, in a fog. If you lose somebody you love and you're just out of it for a while. But more severe trauma, if I can go on about the trauma.
Absolutely.
I'm going to get on to people who have had sightings and encounters. So that in severe trauma, it can be childhood sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. What happens is that the trauma exists, and it's so powerful, so overwhelming, that things disconnect inside. So a person does not feel fully present, or they are functioning, but they may not have memory. They may not have emotions that are directly connected to the event. was a psychoanalyst called Shengold, Dr. Shengold, and he talked about extreme trauma, such as childhood sexual abuse, is being a terrifying too muchness, a sense of being encapsulated in a terrifying too muchness of the experience, of being flooded with all these feelings and not being able to deal with them. And so there becomes a disconnect. For children with these abuses, they tend not to talk about them because of fear of reprisal or nobody will listen. For rape and sexual abuse, it's often not talked about because the victim may be accused or blamed. In war, everyone is affected. Explosions, the constant uncertainty, and that's important. The people dying, injuries, no food. And soldiers with PTSD witness body parts being blown off on constant alert for threats, doing things that they never imagined they would do as a moral injury. But yet there's a unique bond that develops when soldiers are in combat together. They know what each other has experienced because they've experienced it as well. There's a closeness, a caring, a tenderness without talking about it, a tenderness without words. Sometimes this bond can be described as being closer than blood. Many times soldiers don't talk about their experiences, except for a few that are very close. With these severe traumas, there can be something called dissociation. It's a disconnection, a disassociation from a memory of the experience or a feeling about the experience. And what can happen is there may not be a recollection of such a trauma for maybe years later, or feelings will come out, but no one will know why. Anger, frustration, sadness. So now we move to sightings and encounters with UAPs. Now we know that there's worldwide reports of UAPs, and there's similarities and there's consistencies, even with some variation. These reports in themselves become indicators, factual indicators. Sightings, it's interesting because initially a lot of people are excited and enthused. What did I just see? And curious, intrigued, and it can be positive, not traumatic. Sometimes sightings can be viewed as a threat. There's something I've never seen before. What is it? It scares me. I'm terrified. And it can become really terrifying if there's some maneuver, some movement of the sighting that seems to be perceived as a threat. So another aspect is that with sightings, more than encounters, I think, is that there's this self-doubting, self-questioning. Maybe I didn't see that. I thought that's what I saw, but it's probably something else. Someone had described to me seeing lights in front of them on the road, and they followed the turn of the car, and they weren't their headlights. And then they talked themselves out of it by saying, it was the turn in the road, and that the lights were probably always in the same place, but I was seeing them differently because of my positioning. Another friend, and that person, in talking about it, slowly was talking themselves also into remembering there was more to it, and there was some apprehension in it. Someone I've known for 40 years. And I've been asking people more recently about these awarenesses. And they were quiet when I asked them. And they said, well, in a rural area and it was dark. And they were walking with 3 little children. And they saw light over the lake. They became scared visiting. Eventually, they calmed down and that friend walked them back to their home. But as she was telling me, she was saying, oh, it was probably a reflection of the moon on the water. It was late at night and it was confusing. We were tired. But as she kept talking, her voice was exhibiting fear. It was becoming shaky and nervous and concerned. So that's not an uncommon thing to sort of minimize, but the feeling is still there. The feeling hasn't gone away, even after 30 years.
So and thank you for that, for the breakdown of the traumatic, different types of trauma and the similarities between PTSD, sexual assault, child abuse, any type of traumatic experience is akin to a response that from someone who might report contact in this fashion. And as we talk about the effects on the person having the experience, an entangled factor is the response of the person that did not have the experience, the wider public that may not have had any exposure to this, or due to personal beliefs, has a difficult time really being empathetic. So what kind of support should be made available to someone who reports contact with UAP or NHI, considering those factors of, the believability and holding it in? What kind of support would you hope to see?
Well, I'm going to say just a little bit more about people who have encounters. And then, yes, the aspect of wanting to be believed. Because when people have encounters, and there can be a distortion in memories, but the feelings are all real, they can experience an extreme sense of threat and seeing something they've never seen before, and it becomes close. It's terrifying. And when there's also this sense of helplessness at what's being experienced, it's again that terrible too muchness of being flooded with feelings and overwhelmed. And so there can be rage later on. Certainly there's anxiety, hypervigilance, difficulty sleeping, confusion, disorientation, and not wanting to speak about it because of fear that I don't want people to think I'm crazy, think I'm deranged, think I'm weird, that I'm making it up, and I don't want to be diminished. I don't want to be thought less of. I don't want to lose the respect of my community. I don't want to lose my status and with friends, with people I work with. So it's not talked about. Oftentimes, a person, well, they may not even mention it once to somebody unless they get a sense of an opening, that this one may be more open. So that's a key, is being open, but believers are open. The people who don't believe, no matter what you say, I don't believe, that's silly. It's weird, it's nonsense. But for first responders or for anyone in society, the more we can be open, just even open to the possibility and caring about another human being, about human beings in general, is that we can listen differently. When someone says something, whether we believe it or not, The feelings we can relate to, even if the ideas are not. And it's listening to the fear or the excitement or the confusion, being present to somebody by listening. And through listening, there's a sense of acknowledgement. Someone is there with me, they are listening, they acknowledge that I went through something. And then I'm not alone. Somebody's here with me. Even in if it's on the phone, they're with me in what I'm experiencing. When someone acknowledges not just to the words, but to the feelings of what's going on, that allows for a sense of safety, of not being alone. Remember those early difficult traumas, people are alone. They don't feel they can talk to anyone. The experience of sighting a UAP or an encounter with one, they want to share it. They want to share this thing that happened to them that's so extraordinary. Not always the difficult part of it, but they want to share the uniqueness, and there's even some wonder, intrigue, curiosity about it. So it's having someone that can be shared with, who will listen and be present.
That's great. I mean, again, the support of just generalized individual empathy is important just in general human relations. And it's unfortunate that, people who experience various type of trauma, are feel normal, may have no symptoms of any type of, mental defect or trauma, but as a result of the trauma, these symptoms then emerge, and much of that is contributed to the fact that a traumatic event has occurred, but they can't talk about it because no one will believe them. You've talked a lot about, again, the person having the experience, but you've talked about the recommended mode of support of empathy and generalized support. For anyone that has personal beliefs that prevent them from really engaging, what do you think, what additional information do you think would be needed to resolve uncertainties about facts? I mean, you talk about evidence and different information relative to data. What information is needed to resolve uncertainty about facts relating to UAP or NHI contact?
Well, it's difficult because we know that people who've had an experience, the experiencer, the person who's had a sighting or an encounter. For other people who haven't, it's hard to believe. And so just and also this attitude of bias and judgment doesn't change easily. But as you described, there are reports going worldwide. And with these reports, there's similarities, there's consistencies all over the world, can be in some way made public, but it takes the coordination, the collaboration, organizing to allow reports to be analyzed, assessed, and made that this is not as uncommon as they thought. It exists, and they're similar. And whether you believe it or not, the reports are real. They've been offered or given to first responders and reported. They exist. And having that information is very significant. for a lot of people.
So again, what we have is a theme of basically more information that would be helpful to resolving questions about facts that would not only remedy the belief systems of whether or not something is true or not, but would remedy the support for someone who reports an experience but has nowhere to go. So that information would be helpful in bridging the gap with that support.
Yes, it's
So
both. It'll do both. It will help the person who has the experiences to know they're not alone.
absolutely.
It would
So
it would
is there a
help
good
people.
reason, is there a good reason clarifying information should be withheld on facts related to UAP or NHI encounters? That's the question is, given your recommendation, is there a good reason that information should just not be provided?
I think it's the quality, the type of reporting. This is something that I think needs more research. We want information shared so people can feel safer, that they know they're not alone, that they know they're not deranged, but these are reactions to experiences. We also don't want to terrify people. So more research, I think, is necessary to analyze the data, to see what it means, and to see where it then leads. What's the next step to take with this data? And to have it centralized, to have each country perhaps have their own centralized collection of data, and then also have a global collection of data. Because as different people have said, this is a global issue. It is not national. And we want to respect that and take advantage of the possibility that we can actually work as a world, function in unity together, helping each other.
And you mentioned, panic, people being terrified. On the subject of, mass hysteria, what are concerns relative to mass hysteria or other adverse public responses to government disclosure of UAP contact?
Well, I found 3 different situations, incidences, that will help give us a clue. In 1938, there was a radio adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel, War of the Worlds. Orson Welles did this adaptation, and he did it in a very realistic and creative way. There was a regular program, and then he would come in and break into the radio program that was going on, saying this is a news alert, something has just happened, it's creating a huge disturbance, we don't know what it is, stand by, we'll get more. And then it goes back to the program. So everyone's paying attention, what's happening. Then he comes in again, the Martians have landed in this area of the city, ... And people are taken in, they think it's real, because many people did not hear the beginning of the program that said this is a fictionalized novel that's being done on the radio. So people are getting scared. And the more that happened, the break-in of Orson Welles saying what was going on in this novel, as if it was true, people did panic. People were getting in their cars, moving across cities. So there was panic. That was in 1938, after World War I, about a year before World War II. There were tensions occurring in Europe and all over the world. People were beginning, or at least our country and other countries, beginning to be concerned and on edge. And then the timing of this is significant, and it did create panic. But now we're getting closer to our time. In 1996, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, There were a number of sightings reported, enough so that an physicist, Dr. Hynek, was brought in as a consultant for the Air Force. The finding was swamp gas. Of course, most of the witnesses did not finding. There was no panic. 1997, it's called Phoenix Lights in Arizona, considered perhaps one of the largest sightings in the U.S., and estimated 10,000 or more people witnessed it. They saw a large V-shaped light, sometimes people would say a boomerang shape, over the city. The military said they investigated, and what they found was that their response was, this is military flares. Again, a number of the witnesses did not accept that finding. And again, there was no mass hysteria, no panic. Are we moving to a time with the different movies, media stories that people, I think someone earlier spoke of, we were becoming desensitized to this, so that there isn't panic. It's something I was just asking some people that I didn't even know if they believed in UFOs or UAPs. And they said, sure, as if it was nonchalant, that of course. But also there are some people who would say, no, that's silly. Still today, there's both. So that's the response in terms of whether there would be mass hysteria.
So
If
in
there would
short,
be-
your assessment is that, you don't see strong indications that there would be a hysterical response by a government disclosure regarding this.
Well, it would depend on what the disclosure says, and what, if there was an incident that was occurring at the time, what would happen? Because we have information that's been going on for a number of years now, that it exists. That hasn't changed a number of people's minds at all. They may be paying attention to it, or they may not be. But if there comes a time when there is an acknowledgement, where there is something that can be also physically seen, but acknowledgement by the government, or not just individuals, but this mass disclosure, this mass acknowledgement, I think that will be a difference. But how it's done will make that's the essence, I think. There is so much misinformation in our country and in our world. We've heard the word fake news as many times as we have turned on the radio, almost. The media is incredibly powerful, and it's split. There's a tremendous lack of distrust, a lack of trust. The world feels, our country and the world feels divisive. The way information is presented will make all the difference, I think. It can be presented in a way that increases anxiety, increases conflicts, or the way it's presented can actually help to stabilize, to make it safe. The information presented, the way it's presented, is paramount.
Those are great points, and that's actually a very important part of this discussion, is the way that information is communicated. So, with that in mind, how do you think the public will respond to the government disclosing not only that UAPs are real, as evidenced by the congressional hearings and other official testimonies, but that they may be controlled by other forms of life?
Again, I'm going to say it will depend greatly on the way it's presented. Who presents it? Their persona, their reputation. Are they reactive themselves? Are they solid, present? And are they speaking in a tone of voice that has a certain assuredness to it? It's like when there were the forest fires in California so much and houses were burned down. There was this one commercial that had a young boy sitting with a man as if his father on this pile of rubble. And the young boy started to talk quietly and softly. I'm not quoting accurately, but it had to do with, we'll get through this. It'll be okay. We will go on. How we are as parents, as adults, as leaders, that will dictate how people respond. The people who get looked to, there's the responsibility of caring and taking care of, and how we come across makes all the difference.
Absolutely. Dr. Wiand, thank you so much for your insights today. This is a very important part of the discussion, and what we're, working toward is whatever information that is available regarding these reports, whatever our subject matter experts and our official researchers and officials know about this. We're trying to make sure that we're advocating for a proper release of information that will allow everyone to make the best decisions, for the greater good. At this time, we're going to begin our question and answer session. For our listeners, please submit your questions. Our panelists are ready to respond to any questions that you have. At this time, I'm going to throw out a question here. Larry, I'm gonna throw this one to you. This is regarding the media, and then we can, other panelists, we can also jump in. Why is the mainstream media so blind about disclosure? Larry, you're muted.
I was being good and I have to talk. All right. An interesting question about that perception. I mean, the mainstream media has covered the congressional hearings. They've covered AARO. They've given quite a bit of attention to Luna's congressional committee hearings on UAPs. So, to some extent, it's not that they're not covering the subject. I think all of us who've been involved in it have seen that there's been mainstream media. Of course, it's hard to say what the mainstream media is today, differentiating social media from broadcast media to streaming media. But there's been a lot of coverage of the drone incidents. I guess the question comes down to disclosure per se, and the question of what do we know and what is not being disclosed, and that debate. That debate is occurring in Congress, in the committees, it's occurring online, but you don't see that covered on 60 Minutes. You don't see that covered in the traditional mainstream media. So I think to parse the question down, the mainstream media is covering UAPs, drones, congressional hearings. What they're not covering is specifically the question of disclosure. And some of the questions that you asked earlier, Sean, it's sort of like, you know, what is the government? How does the government determine if they're going to do that? Who do we expect to hear it from? Is it going to be treated like a tornado warning or an earthquake warning? How is this going to be handled? And I think that backs into the fact that still we have not acknowledged NIH. There's been no official acknowledgement of non-human intelligence, certainly not associated with UAPs. Until we pass that point, what is the mainstream media going to say? It's just going to be fluff and discord because they can't discuss that one essential element. It's all peripheral. So I guess that would be my answer. They're talking about UAPs. They're talking about what's being shared and what's being withheld. But what they're not talking about is the core question. Nobody is asking the president or key Congress members, you know, when are you going to take a position? Yes or no? Because it's pretty much what it's going to have to be. Yes or no. It's been 70 years, so you ought to be able to go one way or the other. That would be my point, is that it's a matter of avoiding the question. What is going on is avoidance, not it's not covering up. It's just literally sidestepping the key question.
Sure. And Dr. Taylor, I want to kind of dovetail on that response from Larry. With your background in law enforcement that we heard in your bio, every law enforcement agency has a public information officer. Can you speak a little bit to what some of the reasons are that this information not be covered by the mainstream media? And this is again with the inside knowledge that, departments don't often release certain pieces of information to preserve the integrity of an investigation or to make sure that there's no interference with the investigation. Do you have any insight as to the media response or lack of response on this?
I would say that the there may not be a lot of facts for to report in terms of a sighting, for instance. And so that in combination with an avoidance of dealing with an issue that has a lot of stigma with it, unless you absolutely must, is probably a means of determining whether or not resources will be utilized for the purposes of providing public information to about an incident. They're given not having any kind of official guidance on how to deal with these things means that agencies are left to their own devices, and most will not report it, just as they don't have any protocols on dealing with or investigating these types of incidents.
Again, that's important. And in your prior recommendations in terms of, policy and protocol, it might be a consideration to include media to participate in some of this training because, again, the release of information, as we talked about, the evidence for resources is important. So the more information that we can get broadcast and more awareness, then there's more sensors that are collecting the information and saying, hey, we really need to kind of pay attention to this.
I just wanted to add that the conversation, this question should not be answered without including the allegations by whistleblower David Grush about efforts to utilize influence campaigns to discourage reporting about this issue or to otherwise negatively influence the public about reporting, and law enforcement agencies for that matter also reporting about incidents. So that's another component that complicates this issue that we do. Most likely we've been dealing with many decades of influence to try to dissuade individuals and entities from dealing with the issue in a serious manner.
Well taken. Dr. Wiand, here's a question related to healthcare. Regarding the provision of healthcare, how can health professionals breach the redacted government information regarding known health effects of UAP? Now, I understand this is a very specialized focus, so we might need to talk about this. But it's reported that patient experiencers of UAP deserve to receive competent care. And there's a concern that the various governments are withholding it. So what as a psychologist and a member of the healthcare community, what can we do to better ensure that anyone who reports contact that has related health effects is receiving the proper care and is not having their health care obstructed by any organization or individual? Dr. Wind, you're muted.
I'm not certain if the concern is that because a person is reporting an encounter, that they are not being treated adequately. If it's attitudinal, that they're not being treated adequately. Or is it a lack of knowledge of what because there's both things that have been talked about today, the psychological and the physical aspects. When Dr. Taylor was talking about the effects physically on some of the first responders. So we have both going on. And I think people are just simply not informed. And that's the responsibility of the people who know. How do we help that process? So it's education. If education both psychologically and physiology, and the education in terms of people's own biases and judgment, and learning how, even if that doesn't go away, which we hope that it will lessen, because what happens with biases when we know a person that we may have had a bias towards, if we know them and know who they truly are, those prejudices and biases tend to go down on a one-to-one basis. So the more information we have, the more experience and the knowledge. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's education both on what actually happens to people, what injuries can they suffer, or what trauma can do to the body, just emotional trauma, how that can affect the body. So all of that is involved. I'm not sure if that answered the question, though.
So I think you hit it right on the head.
Education and
It's the
training.
education. The education allows for the involved professionals and people in the support network to recognize what is actually occurring. If there's not enough education, then there won't be a recognition, and there will be then an assumption that nothing is there. And due to the reality that, mental illness is a reality in society, that it's easy to chalk it up as that. But the dilemma that we have is that there are so many reports from credible people reporting very consistent dynamics in some of these encounters that it just seems to warrant further study and discussion, and as you mentioned, education. So no, I think you did answer the question. It's a larger problem, but we just need to keep talking and getting more data. On the
And I
subject,
think
go ahead.
as the information goes out globally, if reporting information people will respond. They will begin to take notice. They would be reacted to in a way of paying more attention, but it needs to be done truthfully and consistently and in that same kind of presence that we would want in disclosure.
Thank you very much. That's a very good point. Um, for Ian, here's a question. With the discovery of so many exoplanets, including those that you were a part of discovering, is the James Webb Telescope being properly tasked to help in the search for life elsewhere in the universe?
Firstly, I'd say that the first exoplanet wasn't discovered until 1990s. Prior to that, we didn't know whether there were other planets in the universe. So we've come a long way since just 30 years ago. So it's a progressive thing. In terms of the Webb telescope, I would obviously be dedicating a lot more of its time to discovering life on other planets, but they do have a multitude of different priorities and research projects. But I think it's going to be an important tool for discovering at least life in the universe. So yeah, I'd say they're doing a good job, and I think there's going to be some important discoveries coming out of that in the near future.
Great. And just a follow-up question, with the work that you've been able to do with your analysis of the available data, what would be your ask to any specific organizations or agencies to collaborate with you personally as a researcher, or anyone that you know that does the type of work that you do?
Yeah, as I said, a lot of the time and effort goes into collecting the data and getting it into a format that we can actually use, and that is very time consuming. And we're dealing with fragmented data. It's very important that we bring all these data sets together and make them available as one data set. So we're not duplicating information, we're not missing information. We're getting this worldwide view because a lot of the data sets are really focused on one region. So it needs to be very transparent. It needs to be available to everyone so that we're all working with the same data. And it needs to be in a format that we can easily analyze and understand. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into getting a structured database up and running that we can start to use.
Great. We have to continue those appeals. For Dr. Wiand, you mentioned querying some of your associates and then being encountered by others, and so through your research, do you sense that the experiences that you're hearing are the same today as in the past, or are there changes in the experiences that people are encountering?
And I don't know. I think that we hear different things depending on our own attitudes at the time and who we are associating with. So our communications are different. Have I heard different things in terms of encounters or sightings now than before, or the amount of? I have been inquiring more. My openness is more than it used to be. And so because it wasn't on my radar, it's on my radar now. And just that openness, I am hearing more.
Interesting. And of course, part of the data collection and analysis is tracking any changes that people like yourself are becoming exposed to through the various interviews that you're conducting, both formal and informal, of course. Um, on the subject of resources, and I'm going to ask this of the group, uh, do you foresee a future where taxpayers will be willing to fund government programs and studies to understand various encounters, whether they be UAP or experience or encounters, beyond military personnel encounters. And that alludes to the all domain anomaly resolution office that is taking reports strictly for military personnel. So the question is geared towards public encounters. Dr. Taylor, let's start with you.
Certainly. I do know that the current head of Arrow said in a recent interview with Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson that there was an effort afoot by his unit to create a portal for public reporting. It may be for law enforcement officials or other government entities to report based on what they receive from the public. But that would be a great start towards understanding the scope and scale, depth and breadth of the issue, which then would inform legislators on how much needs to be spent in resources to address it. And right now, we don't have a clear picture. And so we can't have a clear policy because we don't have clear data. So data collection will be very important. It has to be at a large level, such as a federal agency, because it is a national as well as global issue.
And you hit it right on the head. Again, clear picture, clear data, clear information comes by way of information sharing. Thank you for that important point. Larry, thoughts on taxpayer funded government programs for encounters?
I'm probably a little bit more negative than that, than Dr. Taylor, because my position would be we have had the data to support it for years and years. I've seen, and anyone can see now, internal documents from the Air Force or the CIA acknowledging that. So it really wasn't a question of whether there was something anomalous going on. It was a question of whether the government was going to openly and officially engage with it. And there are always two lines of discussion, and there's the internal dialogue that's going on within an agency or service, and then there's what the public information officer is saying. And there's generally a great disconnect, if not 90 degrees, 180 degrees. So without being single-minded about it, I get back to the point, the system cannot deal with the problem unless you acknowledge the problem. It actually isn't an officially stated problem for the government. It's not an officially stated problem for Homeland Security. It's sort of an officially stated problem for the military. Now, certainly, I think with what's going on in the congressional hearings with the military, there's pressure on AARO and there's pressure on the Department of Defense. The drones have increased that pressure, but whether there is pressure on the system to assess the fundamental problems, I mean, it's just like was just being discussed. Addressing the problem means acknowledging it and then moving the response mechanisms into play. I saw someone post here, I don't know what to do in an emergency room. I have no protocol. I have no references. Right now, the average citizen, I mean, back at least in the 60s and 70s and 80s, you were told to report to the Air Force if you see something that disturbs you. Now, where's the citizen go? Do they just dial 911? If they dial 911 and they go to emergency response, what's the official protocol for parsing them out for medical treatment, psychiatric treatment? So I hate to be negative, but you've got to acknowledge the problem before you can go to a solution, and we've yet to acknowledge the problem.
Well, part of this effort in terms of getting information release is kind of the philosophy that, we'd rather hear a bad truth than a good lie. Some people may not agree with that, but I think that's what we're talking about is no matter what the truth is, we want that to come out. So your candid response is appreciated, and again, you have a wealth of information based on your history. Dr. Wiand, from a healthcare standpoint, what are your thoughts on taxpayer-funded programs to to research encounters?
I liked what was just said. but I would have a different take on it. I think the information that the public doesn't have enough information. I think if they knew, I don't know that we know I don't know the extent. You said there were over 1,000 or thousands of reports. I think that there can be a great benefit to having these reports consolidated around the world, collaboration in getting more information in a very formal, unified way that can be disseminated similarly in each country, to say what's going on in that country, what's going on in this country, what's going on in the Midwest, what's going on in the East Coast, West Coast. Are there certain states more likely to have an event? What are some of the physiological problems that can occur? What are the psychological difficulties? And that has to be sorted out. That one, I think, can easily get mixed up, but a greater understanding to what's a reaction as opposed to a more serious issue. And there, with more information, and if it is found that the amount of it is increasing, if more people become aware, I think they will. If they feel that people they know are being affected, then I think people will say, let's do something. Let's build the park. Let's fix the roads. And these are human beings. Let's have food for the children. But it depends on the community, and it depends on the awareness. So part of the thing about reporting, consolidating information, the reliable dissemination of information, that it has to be reliable, it has to be truthful, numbers, and the more specifics of what's needed if someone arrives at a hospital, to know what is really going on and how things can be helped. If people think that it's touching them, they will be more likely to do taxes.
Well said. So Ian, I want to actually throw this over to you because we've, talked about there's a lot of reports, there's thousands of reports. You looked at the data. How many reports are there?
How many reports? Well, there are hundreds of thousands of reports in multiple databases throughout the world. Not all of the cases have a lot of data that go with them. So, if someone sees a light in the sky and that's all they've got, there's not a lot to go on. But there are still a large number, and we're talking in the thousands, that have credible witnesses. They have multiple witnesses. They have supporting data. They're coming from, police officers or military or pilots or public with multiple reports. So there are a high number of credible reports that we can use to understand what's happening, not just in the US, but worldwide.
And so with the volume of reports that you've seen, I want to turn to you in terms of the international component of this, because we focus a lot on the U.S. governmental, the conspiracy. What are things like in New Zealand as far as, dedicating resources to this? And how are you managing that in terms of your contribution to data analytics?
It doesn't have a very high profile in New Zealand at all. The media doesn't really touch on it. Recently, we're starting to see a few more balanced articles coming out about UAP, but in the past, it's been treated as a joke, and it doesn't get a lot of coverage. So that is slowly changing, but I would say that New Zealand is years behind countries like the US. Australia is slowly moving. They're probably a little bit more ahead of us in terms of their willingness to discuss the topic. So I think a lot of my time and effort and analysis is spent working with overseas people and overseas data.
All
It's
right.
just
Well,
because of the lack of engagement in New Zealand.
yeah. Well, we can just keep continuing the effort. Dr. Wine, I want to come back to, there's an important question here, and the information you provided earlier, your insight into generalized support and empathy as, as the primary or priority of support for people reporting contact. There's an important question here. Is there any view on broadening mental health support that's made available for those that are impacted by this? So other than generalized communal empathy, what other ways can we broaden mental health support for people who report these types of incidents?
I think that's a good question. And I think awareness that it exists. There was, for child sexual abuse, for years, that was not even touched. And it had been going on. So awareness slowly came about. And it's still largely hidden. So in terms of how much this is occurring, how many people are impacted by it, because the numbers matter. It's like I was saying with the taxes, that if it is my road that needs repair, I will pay taxes for it. If I have an awareness that there's more going on in numbers and location, something can be done, but it is a slow process. It's sadly a very slow process. And how to speed it up, I think, again, is this dissemination of information that is truthful, that is consistent, but gets out to where it needs to get out. I think there can become more of a response than has been, but it is slow, sadly, on all the issues.
Thank you for that. I'm going to read a response from Dr. Eric Davis, who is provided some insight into the James Webb Telescope. He says it's being tasked to observe for technosignatures coming from possible habitable exoplanets. But that's not its full-time job, because the James Webb Telescope is a shared facility that's used by numerous astronomers who study numerous different astronomical topics. So for the inquiry regarding James Webb, that's the information that Dr. Davis has provided for us. Last question in the interest of time, and I'm going to ask this of the panel. How do you think a formal government disclosure will come out? Dr. Wiand, let's start with you.
It depends on the administration of how it will come out, how it would be even approached to coming out. Something that I would like to be said during the process is that when people are unfamiliar with something, there can be fear or aggression as a response to a perceived threat. If the information comes out in a steady, solid, assuring, we're moving towards understanding this more, we're working on preparedness, and also if we can cultivate openness to whether or not they may not be a threat. Perhaps, like was already talked about earlier, are our attitudes allowing for engagement or not? If we are open, I think we can move towards unity in many ways, not only world unity, country unity, and move towards. Things are not anywhere near that right now, but I think there are things that are happening that is moving us forward. So it all depends.
Well said. Ian, again, we understand that New Zealand is not, fully resourcing this, but given the contributions that you're making through data analysis, how do you foresee a formal disclosure, whether it's the U.S. government or any other government coming forward?
I would imagine that it would be rushed and reactionary due to information flowing out faster than they can possibly handle. So I would say, yeah, reactionary and not maybe controlled and well thought through. So that would be my estimate.
That's encouraging. Okay. Dr. Taylor.
Yes, I would say that we've had confirmation just by the creation and lack of support of the UAP Disclosure Act over the last 3 years, the whistleblower testimony of very credible individuals over the last 3 years, independently the worldwide reports and the social media reporting through the videos of individuals who have shown what they've seen that they can't explain, and the flap of what is called drones without a real basis for calling them drones. Those are real things that have been happening that really make disclosure a distinction without a difference, because we're living through real-time incidents that are occurring on a very frequent basis.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And finally, Larry, as the senior panelist with the greatest history of research, how do you foresee a formal disclosure coming from our government or any other government? You're muted, Larry. You're still muted. Try it again. There you go.
There we go. Historically, we do have some perspective on that. There was a step in 1952 where, at least with inside the government, both the CIA and the Air Force, in response to a presidential inquiry, were ready to take that position. And were ready to take the position at an executive level. The problem being, you run into the political issue of at the executive level, national security level, the pushback was the academic community has to support that. There has to be a scientific support. There has to be a credible, neutral support for this to go forward to engage us all. And that didn't happen. The academic community did not line up behind it because they wanted irreversible evidence and they couldn't come up with it. I think that would have continued for a number of decades. If we had actually found microbes on Mars or life on Mars, what you would expect would be life outside of this planet would have been announced through the academic community, probably through NASA. The same thing would be applicable to SETI. If we had discovered intelligent life outside the solar system, it would have been released through academic channels and vetted, and it would not have been sensational. Unfortunately, we're going more in the direction I'm afraid Ian is talking about now, because we are tending to undermine or move away from our academic, professional, studied responses to these sort of things. Just not even full disclosure, just acknowledging that there is non-human intelligence, So the channels for bringing it out in a structured just having an announcement, fairly low key. We've determined it's here. We're dealing with it. That seems to be trending away towards the more sensational. Let's wait until something makes it happen, and then it's going to be bad. So I'm kind of in between, Sean. There was a practice. There is a protocol. Actually, there have been discussions at the United Nations. There have been international discussions of how you would release this information. But it gets so politicized, and again, nobody wants to lay credentials on the line, right? Maybe the whistleblowers are willing to lay them on the line, but especially the scientific community has backed off to a large extent from supporting those decisions. And unless they engage and get involved, I'm not sure I see an easy, non-sensational path towards announcement of disclosure. I'm more afraid that it will be sensationalized. Somebody will force it on the public through social media, and that could be catastrophic.
All right. So again, these are all great points. I thank you all for your insight, Larry, for your historical research. It's a great service to the study of this subject. Ian, the hard work that you're doing with your data collection and analysis globally is a service to research on this topic as well. Understanding the patterns and the indications as to when and how incidents may occur can enhance our ability to predict information. Together, the history and the data collection is the more of the evidential and foundational aspect of the research on this topic. But as we look at the evidential aspect relating to is this real, that again is to more toward the one conversation of, do I need to believe this? Do we have enough evidence? But when we get into the strategic aspect of the discussion, Dr. Taylor, your contribution to this in the way of public safety recommendations, the do's and don'ts in an investigation, what are the things that are hampering us from understanding how to better understand these reports, what we should do about it. And then Dr. Wiand, your contribution from a psychological aspect of what are our emotions likely to be in the event that this were true? What is likely to happen? And that assertion seems to be what is driving the disclosure of information. And it works the same in any privileged investigation or operation that is heavily shrouded in confidential and privileged information. So the collection of data, the collection of evidence is essential to this. And so together, it is important that we continue our efforts at collaboration so that we can gather the information from a global perspective. So again, I thank you all for your participation. At this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to Yuan for some final comments.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you for doing a fantastic job today as our moderator. And thank you to all of our esteemed panel experts. I think the insights that each of you brought to our discussion today resulted in a very important and engaging dialogue. And one of the themes being needing to raise awareness in a credible, fact-based way. I hope that this discussion, I hope and I think that this discussion has moved the needle in that regard. And we're doing that by having town halls like this. And to everybody watching today, thank you for your questions and your participation as well. We look forward to hosting additional town halls in the coming months that will continue to focus on public safety policy and address additional topics such as the potential impacts of future revelations about UAP disclosure on our society, economy, national security, religious beliefs, and technological advancements. So stay tuned for more. If you're interested in supporting our efforts and staying updated on our activities, you can visit our website at uapdisclosurefund.org. And again, we appreciate everybody's participation and time today. With that, we will sign off, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.